Hi, my name is Bill Griswold, and I was, when I was young, a person who went out to Turkey in 1953, and I stayed there until 1957, and I was accompanied by my wife, Jean, whom you'll hear about later on. She's right here. The nature of the involvement of our work there in Turkey was to teach English. We went out to be teachers. We went out to be good friends with Turks, to learn about Turkey, to learn the culture, and to apply some of the ideas we had from America to the Turkish experiment in life as a new democracy. Because Turkey was such a young democracy. When we get out there in Talas, near Kayseri, we found a wonderful spot on the mountains that had 3 X's, and we wondered what the 3 X's were. Well, that was the number of years that the Turks had been a republic. In America, it had been some 200 years by that time, and here the Turks had been a republic for 30 years, and we were able to be helpful in helping their young people learn English and invest in their education for their future. So we had all kinds of memories of our involvement there. I suppose the most interesting involvement we had entirely was students. We could work with students during the day, we could work with students during the night. It was a 24/7 experience. It was kind of a fun time in many ways, although there were many times when it was so cold and so miserable. The food was not always the best that we'd ever had, and the boys would complain and we would complain. But the sun would come out later on and we'd all warm up, and life became very, very remarkable. Teaching at Talas was something very special for us. We'd been teachers before. Both my wife and I had taught in the United States. I had been in high school teaching. And when we came to Turkey, we realized that this was not the same kind of a teaching experience as we had had. I always stayed in my own room, and the students would come in from places to the room. This is the way we do it in America, whereas in Turkey, everybody stayed in the same room, and the teachers moved from place to place. So that was a challenge, but something we could solve very rapidly. We also taught with foreigners, that is, Turks. And then it suddenly occurred to us, they weren't the foreigners, we were the foreigners. And so we became very acutely aware that we had a different culture, and there were certain things that we should be very careful about. One of them was always the problem of discipline. How do we make these students do what we want them to do? The Turks had a different way of applying disciplinary measures, which we did not follow, not because we didn't like them, but because we weren't like the Turks, didn't know how to do it appropriately. But in many ways, we had to learn to be skillful in shunting the enthusiasm of the students, which was always very sharp, very smart, very often ahead of us, because they were such challenging young men. And we were able to learn to make our point and get things done, sometimes cleverly, sometimes not so cleverly, but always with their students' interest and involvement. What things are most vibrant in my memories of this involvement? Well, of course, the Turks, the colleagues, and the students. This was, but also I think another fascinating part of Turkey was getting to know the region. You have to remember, in 1953, Turkey was just beginning. Where we were was not Ankara, it was certainly not Istanbul. It was out in the Kayseri region, which had been shunted aside by the government at that time. They didn't have a lot of new roads, didn't have a lot of new buildings, and they were a very quiet little, it was almost like a village, although they said there were 80,000 people living there. Jean, my wife, was the only woman, well, I should say there was a woman doctor who could drive a car, but no other woman would drive an automobile in Kayseri at that time. We would go to the village, to Kayseri, to buy food and buy things, and there wasn't a great deal on the shelves because Turkey was in a very difficult time financially, and things were hard to get. But we were able to buy a phonograph, I remember, a Philips, something like that. We bought rugs. We always had wanted to have a beautiful Turkish rug, and we got one when we were there. We had an interesting relationship with the people of Kayseri. The various interests of my life which were affected by Turkey, of course, was the language and the culture and the history. I was somewhat trained historian. I had a master's degree in history of medieval Europe at the time, and I had learned a great deal about Turkey through those studies, I thought. And then I began reading about Turkey. I had a lot of chance to read dozens and dozens of books while I was teaching there, and learned about the Ottoman Empire and some of the things. And so obviously this experience that I had gave me a possible opportunity to do further research and study in the Turkish language and history, and that's what I did when I returned after 4 years of teaching in Talas. Obviously the knowledge of some of the, how shall I say it, the knowledge of language, although it was not a very great knowledge, was enough to get me started in Turkish. When I got to my graduate work, it meant that I had to learn not only Arabic to go along with the Turkish, but Osmanlıca, which was a rather a new experience that I had not had before. The regrets that you ask in one of the questions, what are your regrets regarding you living in Turkey? I think one of the regrets that I have especially is that I didn't do much more traveling. We didn't see much of Turkey then. We've seen Turkey later since. I have to remember, of course, that I was living virtually in a rather impoverished situation. We had what was about $120 a month, but a lot of that was taken to savings, and we didn't have a lot of money to travel around the country. And although it was they had a vast railroad system. Railroads were somewhat expensive for school teachers. We did have school teacher ratings on our ikamet tezkeresi, which was helpful, but mostly we would go to Ankara or to Istanbul just to see a little bit more life as it really was lived in the westernizing part of Turkey. So we didn't do a lot of looking at the glories of the region of Turkey in the east, which we have been able since those years to do, and have become greatly impressed with what they have. Keeping up acquaintances with Turks since that time really has been a part of our whole lifestyle. Our house is decorated with Turkish things that we've gathered and purchased and acquired from time to time. We have beautiful rugs made in America, which look like Turkish rugs because we can't afford the really good ones. But we have had a couple of experiences with beautiful things from Turkey because of the kindness of Turks who have given us beautiful gifts, which we greatly cherish. These things have changed our lives, mostly because of the people we meet. The people have been former students from Talas occasionally. various colleagues from the world of Turkish studies that I've been involved with. But more important are the university students who come to our university where I taught in the years subsequent to my work in Turkey. These people have become so terribly important in our lives. Right now, one of our dearest friends is a professor of political science in our university who is a native Turk and who is working on some problems of the role of women in the Turkish democracy. These kinds of people are a part of our lifestyle because of the wonderful opportunities we had in Turkey. And of course, just now we've had a grand gathering of two of our friends from Turkey, and the food that we gave them was pretty much Turkish. My wife makes a wonderful Turkish pilav, and the meat dish was lamb, and the beans were in the Turkish style with lots of cooking and lots of tomato sauce and marvelous spices. Language, food, but especially friendship has been a part of our lives. Has it made a difference? It has made every bit of difference in our lives that is humanly possible. It's changed my career from high school teaching to college teaching, from a BA in a general subject to a specific PhD in a Turkish language involved subject. A book written about Turkish rebellions in the 17th century, which no one reads, but is there for the value that it stands as a basic part of the Turkish history. I was just finished. I'll finish this up by saying that one of the fascinating things that has occurred in my life is the connections I have with people related to Turkey, or related to my subject in Turkey, or related to the foods and all the rest of the things that have to do with Turkey. And fascinating to me was the time when one of my colleagues, who was in Lebanon at the time, was told by somebody that his boss wanted a copy of my book on the Celali isyanları, which had to do with the Can Bulat family. Who is the Can Bulat, or now known as Cumbulat? Well, Walid Cumbulat is the Druze leader of Lebanon, and he heard about my book. I sent him copies of it, and he returned a wonderful copy of his own family, a bound volume, 3 volumes of his family, with a lovely inscription telling me about the importance of what I had written. How did I come to write that? It was that wonderful experience that I had coming out to Turkey in 1953 to teach a bunch of Turkish boys about whom I knew nothing, but who I learned to love and to respect and to understand as a part of a great heritage, which is the Turkish Republic of this time.
Playing the piano all the way through.
Yeah.
But it served me well in Turkey because I picked up the guitar a little bit, and I would use that in my music classes and piano to help. And I always played the national anthem during the
Every Saturday.
important days.
Uh-huh.
Every Saturday we sang the İstiklal Marşı, they called it.
Oh.
I began to learn Turkish music and had an appreciation.
They had a piano there, enough for you?
They had a piano
Yeah.
that worked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was a,
İstiklal Marşı.
and
Yeah.
we had a piano in our apartment too.
We
Yeah.
did. Somehow there's been a piano.
So you could keep practicing and keep up your piano
I could
skills.
have been a brilliant pianist if I'd practiced. But
Yeah.
I was too busy teaching English.
Yeah.
Turkey proved to be a life changer for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a life changer from the very beginning because that's the way I bamboozled this gorgeous blonde lady to be my wife.
Uh-huh.
She said, I have the possibility of going to Turkey and maybe teaching school there,
Yeah.
but I'm thinking of marrying this guy, and I'm not sure.
And they said, well, if he's has a teaching credential, he can go too.
Aha.
So I asked him, I said, do you want to go to Turkey with me and teach?
And I said, I'll go anywhere in the world with you. So
So we got engaged,
We got engaged and
got married.
spent 2 years teaching to learn how to teach,
Mm-hmm.
and then went to Turkey. And we're very
Yeah.
lucky. We learned a lot of new things about teaching, about
Yeah.
how to discipline yourself and discipline your children and
Mm-hmm.
do a good job.
What works and doesn't.
And we've been so proud of the Turkish people and the students that we taught have become such wonderful engineers and doctors and teachers and some of them have even run for office in the national elections, and they've just done things that, because of their knowledge of English and the teaching that we could help them with, they have really made Turkey the great nation that it is. The very first day, I remember I was sitting on one of the many fences. Well, they were actually made out of stone walls around the Talas campus.
Mm-hmm.
And there were two little boys who came out, and they had their hats on and their ties, and they were just brand new preps, and it was 1951, so who knows who they were.
53 we went.
53.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether I was going to try to shake their hands or what, but anyway, they came up to me, and the first thing they did was grab my hand and kiss the back of my hand. And I thought, boy, I realize I'm not in America anymore. None of my students in where I was teaching before would ever have done a thing like that.
That's not an American
That's
custom.
not American custom.
Yeah.
This was to show total respect
Yeah.
to their teachers, which really was clearly evident all the way through.
Oh, very touching.
Respect for teaching.
Yeah.
Wish we had a little more of that sometimes.
Yeah. Respect for teaching. Yeah.
The first evening, when it was so cold, this was September, and they just had sort of a freak snowstorm that night, because it did warm up later. But the building that we were going to be housed in was an ancient building, and the bed broke, as we mentioned, and my feeling was, well, we'll fulfill 1 year of our contract. It was a 3-year contract.
Mhm.
And then we'll do 1 year and then we'll go. And then the next morning we woke up and the sun was shining, and we went over to the Scott's house for breakfast.
Gwen Scott came.
Gwen Scott came over and invited us for breakfast. And the
American breakfast.
yeah, and everything sort of changed, and we went up to the school and saw where we were going to teach, and so forth, and life became happy again.
That's right.
We thought, well, now this is going to be pretty good.
It's gonna be
But
an
it turned
adventure.
out that we stayed not just the 3 years, but we stayed 4, an extra
Mhm.
year,
Yeah.
because we had Jimmy while we were there, and so for me to fulfill 3 years of teaching, we
Mhm.
needed to have another year. So it would be
Mhm.
6 years for the two of us.
Yeah. So your son William James, or Jim, was
Uh-huh.
born, but he was born in Istanbul.
Yes.
So how did that happen?
Well, we decided that we were happy there, and it would be nice to have our first child, and so Jimmy was on his way, and we had a doctor, a very good doctor, Newt, in Talas, and he said if everything is normal, I could deliver the baby, there'd be no problem.
Mhm.
But he said if there was any problem, he said he did not want me to be there. He wanted me to be at a very good hospital, just in
Mhm.
case
Mhm.
something did happen. So
Mhm.
a month early, I took the train and went to Istanbul.
And your doctor was a Turk.
My doctor was a Turk, Dr. Indenu, or I can't remember his name. He was very good specialist, and I stayed at the Uskadar school. And then my mother came over,
Mm.
because, of course, Bill couldn't be there. He had to be back at Talas teaching.
Teaching.
Oh. you
Yeah, so
couldn't-
he
yeah.
wasn't with me.
Yeah.
And so
The
mother
month
came
was
over.
October.
Came over from America to be there. for
Oh
the
yeah,
birth.
this was
Yeah.
her first grandchild, so
Wow.
she wanted to be there. And we stayed at the home of one of the teachers, Dorothy Blotter. Some of the students will might know her name.
Mm-hmm.
She worked at the Bible House in literature and books. And what was her title? I forget. I don't know. Anyway, we stayed in her apartment, and then which was first we were over on the Uskadar side at the Uskadar school, and then as it came closer to the time, I moved across the Bosphorus because at that time
There was a big.
there was a problem, a military
It was
problem,
a
and the boats
revolution.
were not working at night.
Oh.
And so we didn't want to take a chance of not being able to get across.
Yeah.
So I moved over to Istanbul, the city, and I was within a ride of the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And it came.
Stayed at the Dr. Wiley's apartment on Istiklal Caddesi,
Mm-hmm.
and then went to the hospital there. And then as soon as baby came, we sent a telegram to Bill,
Mm-hmm.
and then he jumped on the train and came. And then he sent a telegram to my dad, and because mother was over there with me.
Yeah.
So sent the telegram to Dad, and it was supposed to be 7-pound baby boy,
Mm-hmm.
and what came through was 1-pound booby. But my father,
What?
yeah, my father and brother figured out couldn't be 1 pound, must have been
Yeah,
7. Well,
yeah.
you know, 7 in European
Yeah.
numbers has a line through it, and
Yes.
we didn't put the line through.
Ah.
So it came out 1 pound, and
Yeah.
instead of baby, it was booby.
Which is a kind of a bird in English. Yes.
So.
Yeah.
So then Billy came and got Jimmy registered at the consulate, and then Bill had to leave because there was a teacher shortage in Talas.
Oh.
Sickness.
Everybody was sick.
So all the teachers
So
were.
I came back because I was well. And guess what? I got jaundice and was down for 2.5 weeks.
Oh.
So we used to have a gathering of old Talas teachers in New Hampshire, where Jim had
Oh.
Our son
home.
Jim.
Son Jim.
Yeah, now all
Kuchuk
grown up.
Jimmy.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sort of slowed down because people are dying, but we had
Well,
the
Mary Lou
Kellers
Johnson.
would come, and Mary Lou Johnson, and what was Jim
Edmonds.
Johnson's widow,
Mm-hmm.
and
Edmonds.
I think the Edmonds.
Oh, the Edmonds,
from
uh-huh.
time to time.
Mm-hmm.
We heard recently that Ann Edmonds is still alive.
Mhm.
She's in Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
So the Talas group continues with lots of memories, but not a lot of people.
Yeah.
We're all diminishing.
Yeah.
We had choruses. We had boys' chorus, all
Mm.
kinds of, where we learned. All the music was in English,
Mm-hmm.
so they learned English through music. That was my reason, justification. And I don't know, some of them really did learn English.
Mm-hmm.
And they told me that they knew songs that Americans didn't know when they came over to the United States for their education.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, they would say, well, we were singing these songs and nobody knew the
Yeah.
words to
They didn't know the words to all these old
To
songs.
Uh-huh. So
American
they
songs.
could learn
But-
with their English what the words meant now.
Well, every
Probably
song,
still didn't make any sense.
they had to memorize the words, you see.
Yeah.
And then I would give them a test.
Oh.
And then they would write, "Oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me.
Mm-hmm.
Come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee."
Most of them came from very comfortable homes, and then they came to Talas, and the bedrooms were cold. There was no heat in the bedrooms. The bathrooms were a distance away. It was rather rough living for these boys who had had an easier life at home.
Support all our lives. They can take a lot of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. They certainly had to suffer. But we're just very fortunate to have had the chance to be there.
Oh, in Istanbul, it was so
Like America.
different. No, I remember the minarets and the music and so forth. But then we went out to the school, which was the girls' school, and
Was it girls' school in Toulouse?
no, in
Üsküdar?
Üsküdar,
Üsküdar, okay.
in Istanbul, and we had a few days there
Right.
when we first arrived, and hot running water and flush toilets and so forth, and it was
Just like America.
yeah. So this is going to be real easy.
Yeah.
And then we got on the train and we went out to Kayseri, and we got
And
to our place.
The weather got worse and worse and got colder and colder and started to snow.
Yeah, it was really cold. It was
Jeep came
a
out.
freak type weather.
A Jeep came out and met us.
Uh-huh.
Some guy named John Scott
Mm.
and a bunch of people, and
Lovely folks.
very nice, but boy was it cold and black and awful, and we got up and the bed sort of creaked. It was terrible.
The bed in the room they
In the
gave you
room,
was
Yeah,
creaking?
the room.
It hadn't been made.
Oh.
No, it was just a bedstead.
Mm-hmm.
And so we
The matron was really upset because she had given
Later on.
instructions to have it all ready for us with the fire going and so forth. And they did have the fire going, so that was a help.
did they have it?
But the bed wasn't made, and she was really upset with the servants.
So we just sat there and looked at each other and said, well, we'll stay a year.
Yeah, we were going to fulfill 1 year of our contract. So this was all this was a very new experience for us. Cold weather.
Yeah.
We were coming from Southern California,
Mm-hmm.
and travel by ship and by train, unusual kind of train, compartments, that. Oh, it was true, huh?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It was,
They didn't go to just Istanbul.
So when then I imagine school started soon, and you got your classes and your students.
Yes.
We had a couple of weeks, I think.
A couple of weeks of training and
Don't you think?
orientation.
Anyway,
no, it was, a week and a
Pretty
half.
soon.
yeah, and then the students came,
Mm-hmm.
and we had both taught, so we had an advantage because we taught 2 years in California.
Uh-huh.
But our two friends that came with us, Tom and Bob, had never taught before.
Uh-huh.
So it was quite an experience for them. But this was too, because I was teaching beginners and they didn't speak English.
Mm-hmm.
So
Beginning English is what you were
I was teaching
yeah.
beginning
Probably
English
didn't know
to the little boys.
too much.
Yeah.
What
They were
words did
12
they
years.
know right off? Anything? I mean, they'd know some English words.
Oh, some things that they might get from TV or
Yeah.
something.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have TV.
Well,
Not
they
in
would have been their
Turkey.
homes
53,
maybe.
yeah.
Maybe not.
Don't think
But and then I had to open up the art room because I was to be in charge of the art,
Arts.
art and crafts.
Uh-huh.
The craft club in the afternoon and art class during the day. So I opened up that, and that was cold too. We had to have a big fire put there.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all new experiences for us. But
Yeah.
at least Bill and I both had taught before.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big help.
I
Mm-hmm.
learned that. They
Mm-hmm.
somehow I got some music in it. It was a nice one. It's a very peppy sort of song, and they all are very serious when they sing the song.
Mm-hmm.
Fear not, Korkmaz. Don't worry about. We Turks are going to do this job, and
Uh-huh.
it was very thrilling to
Very
Yeah.
nationalistic.
nationalistic
Song.
and pictures of Ataturk and
Yeah.
things that we sort of
Mhm.
revered. And it was a lovely kind of patriotic experience every Saturday.
Yeah.
And then they were very serious about making sure that they took some money, 2.5 liras, iki pachuk lira, and they got 2.5 liras and went to Kayseri.
For their allowance.
Spent it all on leblebbies and chocolates and whatever they couldn't get in the school. They were all, 15-year-old kids. They just had a great time. Then they would come home at night, and they'd have to walk all the way. The bus would let them out down below the school, and they'd walk way up the hill. And I would be up there with my list of boys' names who had left and check them all in. And if they were late, oh dear, they had to pay penalty. I don't remember what it was. We weren't too hard on them. I don't think so. But it was a very definitely a boys' school. It was a regimen that they followed. It was a difficult life for some of them. And the poor kids, sometimes they would be snowing and they'd be snowed in. Remember there? Well, you never saw them, but the door or the window or something would be open and the wind would blow all night long. And of course, they slept like logs. They were so tired after all the work and study and so forth. And then they'd wake up and their beds were covered with snow when they were covered with snow.
That happened very often?
Well, it snowed and
well, they'd have
wind, yeah. I don't know how.
Why
much-
didn't they close the windows?
Well, who knows? Somebody might have left it open or something. Anyway, they were. Oh, and the fun time was when on a Friday night they all had baths. So here was not a bathtub. They'd never heard of tubs. They went to Turkish bath, which was all where they all came down in their bathrobes and they were all just thrilled to finally get clean and do all their ablutions. It was just wonderful.
Well, a Turkish bath it's kind of a basin, several basins around the room, and faucets.
And warm room, and of course all
Warm
steamy
room,
and
yeah, and hot water, and they loved the baths.
yeah.
And then after the boys finished, then
Yeah,
I
I
think
think you went by classes. First the little guys, then the older. I don't know. Anyway, by the time we got to the bath, it had been used all afternoon. I mean, it was
Yeah.
really long.
and then Friday night we women went.
First,
Yes, we went first, and so
then all by themselves, of course.
and then it was very nice in this Turkish bath with all of these people,
You got
with the
really
women,
clean.
and then it was your turn, you
Then
fellows.
and then
You stayed forever singing.
That's because we sang.
You sang.
It reverberated in this wonderful sound. And we would be sitting there stark naked, just singing our hearts out because all of us had been in choirs, we had 4-part harmony.
Oh.
Tom was the bass and I was
Tom
the tenor,
Goodrich.
Tom Goodrich, and Bob Keller had a lovely tenor voice, and who was the fourth one? Probably Ralph Myring or somebody like that. Anyway, it was just a fun time.
Up at the school on Saturday morning.
Well, on Sunday morning it was quiet because the boys all were required to go up to the study hall, get out their pencil and paper, write a home to their mothers and dads and say what I've been doing this year, this day, this week. And I guess it was very successful because everybody had to have a signed letter in their hand before they could get lunch or something like that, which was a good deal. So we got those things accomplished, and every year they meet and they talk together and we remind them of the old times. They don't meet because of their college affiliation. They meet because of this, what we would call junior high school affiliation, and it's such a warm relationship they have. My goodness, they laugh and talk, and when we go there, we regale them with stories, and then we always have to sing some of the songs. Ahmed Abe, he comes out. It's just a grand.
Now, well, the school
Memory.
was isolated, and so we were all dependent on each other, and we became very close.
And the boys became very close to each other.
And there were things to do. John Scott was a wonderful principal, and he'd get them all out, the whole 165 kids would go up to Alida, the big mountain there, and we'd go out and plant trees, because we needed to plant trees. Well, the problem was we didn't have any Chinese communist leaders to shoot all the animals who were going to eat the trees, so all the sheep came up there and ate the trees we planted, and they didn't go very far. But the idea was strong, and we'd spend all day, everybody would be eating a sack lunch, and some of the little kids were too fat and too small and complain all the way up the hill, and then others would laugh at them and tease them. And there's, 165 boys. Boy, you have to be young. I'm certainly glad I was in my 30s, I guess, late 20s.
Late 20s.
You guys are
I'm sure we learned more about Turkey and more about ourselves there than we ever passed on to the kids. They learned English, and for that they're eternally grateful, I'm sure.
They became fluent. Right.
Fluent, could take tests, and could reason in the language, and we were probably teaching some of the brightest kids we ever taught in our long careers of teaching. They were just amazing, and they could absorb no matter which one they were. Some of them didn't do as well at first. Most of them just grasped, could get concepts, ideas. Amazing. When you think back, remarkable children they were, so young.
And they had great success. They all went on to so many amazing
PhDs,
careers.
and heads of universities, heads of corporations. Özçelik Balkan just died. He was big shot in International Rotary. He might have been president, I suppose, we lived.